I like to start with weird little tidbits like this. That's interesting to like.
Yeah.
Do you all know that the bottom of a wheel is stationary while the top is spinning twice as fast? And it doesn't matter if you're in your car or on your bicycle or a motorcycle, the bottom is stationary. The top, so if you're doing 20 miles an hour, the top's actually turning at 40 miles an hour. Why am I telling you this? Well, one is right now I have a little Tour de France fever. But, and that's really weird that it does that. I probably shouldn't put the transition in. But also, I just want to make sure that you learn something tonight. And if you learn nothing about my other stuff now, you know about wheels. Alright, so by the way, again, Paul McAllister, I'm the lead instructor at Schiller. So Yvonne asked me to come talk about ND filters, what they are, how to use them. So we're going to talk about that and maybe some other useless stuff as well. So what are ND filters? ND is, neutral density, right? What is neutral density? Well, density means it's darker, right? And I'm sure some of you guys know this, but I'm going from the bottom up because I want to make sure, right? Neutral meaning they're theoretically, notice I mentioned theoretically, neutral. They impart no color into your picture. They're gray. That may not be entirely true, but be aware. In general, they don't have a lot of color. They just darken the image. So, the idea here is that they're going to make the image darker, and that's usually so we can use slower shutter speeds. That's really the primary purpose of neutral density filters, is to use slower shutter speeds. Now, that goes against pretty much everything we're always trying to do, right? We want to get our shutter speed up so we don't have motion and we stop everything. But there are times we do want to slow our shutter speed down. And there are a couple reasons for that. So the common uses for that are to create intentional blur. Right? So I heard somebody, I think it was maybe somebody on Zoom, talk about waterfalls and moving water. That is one of the most common practices of using neutral density. If you take your ISO in your camera, most cameras go down to, a few of them go below 100, but most of them go down to 100. Right? So if you take your ISO all the way down to 100, and you are in bright, sunny conditions, most cameras today, most of our lenses go down to f16 or f22 at best. Right? The old school, we take our lenses down to f64 and stuff of the view cameras. Anybody ever shot a view camera? There's so much. But those days are pretty well gone. So at f16, at 100 ISO, if I'm in bright sunlight, what's my shutter speed gotta do?
Fast. Really fast.
1/100. That's the sunny 16 rule.
Oh.
Right? So sunny 16 means that if I shoot at f16, I match my ISO and my shutter speed. And I have the correct exposure. Now you learned at least two things, the wheel and sunny 16. So sunny 16 comes out of the old film days. Right? And the exposure is still the same, but we didn't have a screen on the back of the camera where we could see everything, right? So we had to know our exposures. So sunny 16, as long as you're in bright sunlight, if you match your ISO and your shutter speed together, at f16 you have the correct exposure. And the sun is a constant, right? It's the only constant we really have. When the sun stops being that intensity, we got bigger problems on what exposure to use on our camera that we're already dead. Now, you probably aren't shooting your waterfalls or wherever they're probably in maybe a shaded area. But even there, if you're at 100 in the sun, you're not going to be able to get a 2, 3, 5 second exposure in the shade. Right? It's still, you're going to be at 60th of a second or 30th of a second at best, maybe. So the most common use is this, right? This is also one. Anybody shoot with flash?
When needed.
So most of our cameras have a flash sync speed of around a 250th of a second. That's the fastest we can shoot without doing high speed sync. High speed sync is a feature on most of the flash units and cameras today, which does allow us to shoot above that flash sync speed. But there's a whole bunch involved with that. So if I want to keep my my shutter speed down to say a 200th of a second, I don't always want to be shooting at f16, right? Maybe I got my happy large aperture lens on and I want the creamy bokeh. Well, how am I going to get that? Now, if I open that up, I'm in bright light and I want to do fill flash. So by darkening the whole exposure, you can then use your flash without doing the high speed sync and all that, because you could be at 200 a second. And then finally, I'm sorry. This, I'm going to show this technique. You can actually make things magically disappear. So this is actually an old photographer trick. And I apologize to those who are on Zoom that I keep walking away from my camera, but it's happened. So you're probably more interested in the screen anyway than me. Photographers in the past, today we got all this AI stuff, right? So who's playing with AI? Anybody? Okay, I'm sorry. Okay, but if I take a picture of a building and there's some people in front of it, I can AI remove them, right? Well, we didn't have AI back in the film days. So photographers would use this cheat where they would use a long exposure and magically make things disappear. And I've been using this for decades and it works great for some of the work I do. And then this one is the final one. It allows large aperture when shooting video. Who shoots video? Anybody? All right. So with video, you are locked into using slower shutter speeds. This sounds contradictory, but with video, whatever the frame rate is, so if I'm at 24 frames per second, my shutter speed is, the ideal shutter speed is going to be twice my frame rate. So it would be 1/48th of a second. Now, some fancy video cameras actually have 1/48th of a second. Your camera is going to have a 50th. If you're at 30 frames per second, your ideal shutter speed would be a 60th of a second. Well, again, I'm using a 60th of a second. I'm down at 100 ISO. I want to use my fancy large aperture lens to blur out the background. The math ain't math. So videographers almost always have neutral density in front of their lenses. Almost always. Because otherwise they're forced to constantly have their aperture closed down all the way. Now, there are a couple reasons we don't want our aperture closed down all the way all the time. One is that it gives us greater depth of field, right? And sometimes we don't want the greater depth of field. And I assume everybody knows what depth of field is and how that works, right? If you don't, let me know, but I'm not going to go there. But sometimes we want the blurred background. But there's another problem. Something that didn't exist on film, that does now exist in the digital world, something known as diffraction. And diffraction is that if you stop your lens down too far, you actually take an edge of sharpness off of your picture. And the reason is actually pretty simple. Your pixels on the sensor, they're actually called photosites. But imagine a small little bucket, right? It's three-dimensional. At the back is the actual sensor. There's a little tube. It's all microscopic, so this must be really cute. But then there's a little lens on the front of each pixel on your sensor. If the light goes in at angles, it goes in and kind of bounces off the edges of the tube to get back to the side. We want it going in straight. So if it comes in at an extreme angle, you'll get this thing called diffraction. So if you use really small apertures, you can get that and actually take it as the sharpness. So those are the reasons we don't always want to shoot at F-16 or everything. So. Let's talk about the different types and styles of ND filters, because this gets into a whole bunch of stuff. So first thing is you can do just basic round filters, right? They screw onto your lens, you know what a filter is, right? They also have some of those, there's a neat system. I actually was at the Missouri Greek U of A conference this past weekend, and Ryan Brown from Canon, you probably know who Ryan is, he comes in the show, if you thought, right? Or was our rep until recently.
I don't know their names.
He had a great set. They're round filters, but it uses a magnetic attachment. So you screw the magnetic filter thread into the filter thread, and then the different filters will magnetically attach. They're still round, but they attach a little bit easier. So you got the round kind. Then you have rectangular filters. Well, what are rectangular filters? Well, rectangular filters are filters like this, which happens to be a square. A square is a rectangle. A square is a rectangle, but a rectangle is not always a square. Right? So they're typically either, if they're squares, 100 by 100 millimeter, or if they're elongated rectangles, they're 100 by 150 typically. Now you might ask yourself, what's the difference? We're going to talk about that. You have fixed NDs. So a fixed ND, you buy them in a certain amount of value. You also have variable. Right? So this gets confusing. Even those of us who use ND filters sometimes have to refer to like the guide or whatever. Some are rated by stops. Some are rated by ND values. Right? So there could be 0.3, it could be a 3 stop, it could be a number 2. And then you have variables. Right? So let's talk about this for a second. A 0.3 neutral density filter is a one-stop filter. So a 0.9 is a 3-stop filter. Or they got these other numbers over here, right? I told you, this gets confusing.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be all that confusing. Quite frankly, most of us in today's world are going by stops. How many stop filter? Is it a 3-stop? Is it a 10-stop? Right? 6-stop. That's how most of us just talk about it. But some filters you will see here marked with some of these other ratings. Now, that leads me to the point that I should probably talk about what a stop is if you don't. We're going to do that. We can make it brief if you want me to move on. So, but what's the advantages and disadvantages for different types? So let's talk about the round threaded, right? So the round threaded are probably going to be the most affordable, right? You're buying the one that fits your lens. It's going to generally be less expensive. They don't require any kind of contraption to attach because they attach right to the front of your lens. The sheet filters like this guy, how's this going to attach to the lens? You have to attach something to the lens that this goes into. Means you're carrying more and all of that. The little round filters are easy to store. This little pouch can hold 6 or more filters in a little thing that folds up. But they're based on filter size on your ring, on your lens, right? So you're either going to, if you have lenses that use 67 and 77, you're either going to have to buy a set for 67 and 77, or you're going to probably need to do like a step-up ring where you buy the 77s and then you will also use that on the 67 lens. So there's that part. And then if you're doing graduated neutral density, which we're gonna talk about. I didn't actually bring any of I do have some threaded graduated, but on the, no, that's a variable. The graduated are filters that are graduated, right? They aren't fully neutral density. On the threaded versions, the graduation is right in the middle. Right, so the top part is dark, and of course they turn to get to where you want. But what does that mean? If I'm using the graduated, so the idea of graduated filters is usually maybe like I want to bring my value of my sky down. Right? So sky's too bright, so I can darken the sky and leave the ground the way it is and get the value for together. But if that line goes right through the middle, what does that do to my composition? Puts my horizon right in the middle. So that's the advantage of the adjustable type. Okay. And they won't work on lenses that are bulbous on the front element. So some lenses have that big bulbous front element that doesn't have a thread capability. So you're not going to be able to put a threaded filter on it. Let's talk about the glass filters. Well, to me, these are glass too, right? But this type of filter. Now, those filters have some real distinct advantages, but they are generally going to be more expensive. One size will fit pretty much any of your lenses. So that's what's nice. That's why I said they're generally 100 millimeters wide. If it's not something that needs to slide up and down to get your horizon line where you want it, then it's just going to be a 100 by 100 millimeter. And there aren't many lenses that are larger than 100 millimeters. There's a few, but not many. So one contraption can fit on your lens. But you do have to have specialty contraptions, right? For the bulbous front element still, because this system, for example, still threads onto a lens. They make some that clamp on. So if I have the bulbous elements, I still need a fancy holder for that. Right? You have the adjustability of the graduated filters. But because of all this, these are typically going to be more expensive. If you're doing a lot of landscape work, you're probably going to want to eventually invest in the sheet filters. If you're not doing a lot of landscape work, probably the round threaded filters are going to be. Just depends on kind of what you're looking for. One of the other things to keep in mind is once that stuff's on your lens, your normal lens caps, your lens hoods, none of that are going to fit onto your lens. If you use a threaded filter, you can put your lens hood right on. Right? So let's talk fixed versus barrier. Right? Fixed NDs. Right? What do I mean by fixed ND? Well, we have variable NDs. This is just a fixed value. Right? If you buy it as a 3-stop or a 6-stop or whatever stop, it remains that. It doesn't change. Those are going to be affordable, the most affordable, and they are a single layer of glass. Variables aren't a single layer of glass, but while one variable costs more than one single, right? The variables literally turn and change. Okay, so if I don't know what value I need, the variable ND can be a good investment because then I can literally turn it and dial in the amount of neutral density I'm looking. It allows you to carry a single filter. These are the ones that the videographers use. Because the videographers, if you're doing video, what they end up doing is they're not making exposure adjustments now on their camera at all. Because their shutter speed is locked in, they've got their ISO down. They're literally just putting one of these on their filter on their lens, and they're dialing in their exposure. Just I want it brighter, I want it darker. And that's how they're making their exposure change. So handy, but they have now 2 layers of glass. Right? A variable ND is essentially 2 polarizing filters. Who here uses polarizing? Probably everybody, right? So polarizing filters are great. We now use what's known as a circular polarizer. Anything you've bought in recent years is going to be a circular polarizer. Circular polarizer doesn't mean that they're round. Of course, they're round. They go on your lens, right? Circular is how they actually do their work. There used to be what was known as linear polarizers. Chances are, if you have sunglasses, they're just linear polarizers. And one of the neat things, if you have 2 pairs of sunglasses, or if you take your sunglasses and break them in half, which I don't recommend, and you take 2 of them and you put them together and you twist them, you will see it get darker or lighter. Because a polarizer works kind of like blinds on a window. It's allowing light to come in on a single plane. So if we take the blinds off of these windows, light would just be scattered. But I have horizontal blinds, so the light only comes in on this plane. Or I could have vertical blinds, and it would only come in on that plane. Or I could have diagonal.
Another example with the sunglasses, if you're in your car, turn your head. And then you'll see how the clouds change, sky, the color of sky changes, it's the same concept. As what
Yeah.
you're saying.
And I'm actually gonna, even though this is neutral density, we're gonna talk a little bit at the very end about polarizers. Because polarizers can double as a little bit of neutral density. But a variable neutral density basically uses 2 polarizers that cross. And so since they're letting in light on that one plane, as you cross the streams, never cross the stream, as you cross the streams, what happens is it blocks more and more light. But one of the drawbacks is that their maximum, they actually can create an X kind of, or like a star look in your pictures because of how light is working. So on a variable ND, if you get a variable neutral density filter, what you need to know is that when you get to the maximum, you actually have to back it off some. Variable NDs usually are not fully usable all the way to their end. In certain circumstances, you can get by with it because the X doesn't show up in your particular scene. But be aware, if you're ever using a variable ND and you're getting like an X look in it, that's why. So multiple layers of glass, the purists don't want to use multiple layers of glass if they don't have to. The less glass I put in front of my fancy lens, the less I degrade my image, right? So we have graduated filter. What are graduated filters? Well, they allow us to darken just part of the image, right? So, for example, this, try to keep the white behind it so you can see it, and so that I don't keep my fingers all over it. This is a graduated ND. The bottom is clear. The top is dark. So I can put this in front of my lens, it will darken the sky. If I have it this way. Or sometimes some of the landscape photographers who do night work, so I guess that's nightscape.
Yeah.
They turn this the other way. If there's ground light, they'll turn the graduated filter so the darker parts at the bottom, so that all of the star and stuff can come in at the top, but they're blocking some of that light from the ground at the bottom. So that's the idea of the graduated filters. Now, I have 2 types of graduated filters. This is the standard graduated filter. It's dark at the top, it's clear at the bottom. Or it's clear at the bottom, which way you go, right? But this is how most people use it, with the darker part at the top. What you'll notice is this one. This is what's known as a reverse graduated. I have clear down here. But my graduation starts here and it gets darker as it goes down until it stops and then it becomes clear. That's kind of weird, right? See if I can break it.
Okay.
Okay. That's actually a super useful filter. If you ever shoot like sunrises or sunsets, one of the things you'll know is the ground is darker, right? And then let's just talk sunset. The sun is settling behind the planet, right? Or turning, but you get the idea. So the horizon is very dark. But as you go up in the sky is getting darker and darker the further up you go. So with a traditional graduated, if I can up here, with a traditional graduated, the darker part of the sky becomes super dark. And the horizon where it's brightest isn't getting the most of the filter effect. So with the reverse grad, here's my ground, the heaviest part of the ND is actually going to be at the horizon. And then as it goes up, it actually gets lighter for the sky that's up there. So that's one of the advantages of these type of systems is you can do that and you can slide those filters up and down and get the effect you want. There are different types of graduation. There's soft grad, which means it feathers. There's also hard grad. So hard grad is, there's a more distinct line between where it's clear and where it gets dark. That is for when you're out on open water or you're out in flatlands where there isn't any kind of distinction. I mean, it's sky, it's ground, or it's sky, it's water. And so when you have that hard line that goes flat across your image, you can use the hard graduation and it works. But most of us, if you're going to buy one, don't buy hard grad. Because for most of us, that's not what you want. And I mentioned the reverse graduation already. That's great for sunrises, sunsets, where the brightest part is actually right where they meet because the sun is setting. So handy filter. As I mentioned, the rectangular filters allow for the most control because you can move that filter up and down in the holder. So this goes over your lens, and then you can change where you want the filter effect to be. So the nice thing about that is I mentioned with the graduated round filters, it's always right in the middle. Where do you not put your horizon ever? Right in the middle, right? We want rule of thirds. And so if we're following rule of thirds or Fibonacci or any of the other composition rules, we don't want our horizon generally. I mean, rules are meant to be broken and it's fine if we do that. But generally speaking, if I do the round graduated filter, it's always going to be right in the middle. And that's not the ideal. So I mentioned earlier about the stops. Who can tell me what a stop means? What is a stop? Right, but what really is a stop? So you're all right, I mean, right, these are what they are. But it's not one of these. That's not what we mean when we talk about a stop, right? With our digital cameras today, we have all this third stop stuff. So let's get away from third stops for a moment. Let's just talk in traditional shutter speed. So I went 1,500, 250, 125, 60th, 30th, 15th days, right? Or in full f stops, 1, 4, 2, 2, 8, 4, 5, 6, 8, 11, That's what our old film cameras had. Right? Well, these are whole value stops, if you will. Right now, we have in between here, we have third stop increments with our digital cameras afford us that opportunity. So 3 of 1 equals 3 of 1, it's the same thing. But what a stop really means is that you are either cutting the light in half or you're doubling. That's what a stop means. So originally, it was about f-stops. All right. So f8, being here in the middle, lets in half the amount of light to 5/16. Lets in twice the amount of light that f11 is. So if you're talking full stops, one stop is either going to let in half as much light or twice as much light is the one on either side of it. So when we're talking about stops in filters, that's what we're meaning. Right? So one stop is letting in, if it's a one stop neutral density, it's blocking half the light. Right? That's what stops mean. Originally, this was designated as apertures, right? Because they're called f-stops. And in the early cameras, by the way, if we want to take a little, you like this history set, f-stops were called, you know why f-stops were called f-stops? The old brass lens view cameras literally had a slot on the top of them where you would take a piece of metal and drop it down in there, and that piece of metal had different size holes in it to stop some of the light. That's where the term f-stop comes from. It was literally a stop. You would put it, you would pull this one out, put that one in. You didn't have this like ring aperture thing that we have today. But now it applies, when we talk about stops, it applies to shutter speeds as well. So 1/125th of a second lets in half the light that is 60th does. Or twice as much as the 250th does. Right? This is easy to kind of process math. Now we're going to get really into the weeds and talk about reciprocity. Who knows about reciprocity? What does reciprocity mean? Reciprocity simply means that these shutter speeds and apertures are reciprocal. That's what reciprocity, right? They're reciprocal. In other words, all three of these are the same exposure. The same amount of light is coming into the camera, right? A 250 of the 5/6, if I close my lens down to f8, but I slow my shutter speed down and stop, because let's cut it in half. That can we know it's the same exposure. That's what reciprocity means. Well, we need to make sure we understand what reciprocity meant, because we need to talk about reciprocity failure. Okay? What is reciprocity failure? It is a phenomenon that was primarily a thing in film, theoretically. And that's when they stopped being reciprocal. So at very short exposures, or in our case, because of our filters, very long exposures, they stopped being reciprocal. When we would have what should be say a 1 second exposure, to get the right exposure might take 3 or 4 seconds instead of 1. Things start acting weird a little bit. Fortunately, we have digital cameras today. Digital cameras, the science says that reciprocity failure doesn't exist on digital cameras. That's what they tell us. I'm telling you that whatever is going on, you still might have some. So if you start using longer exposures and you say, okay, I did a 10-second exposure And I want it to be brighter. By a half stop, half as much bright, right? Logic dictates that a 15-second exposure is going to do that, because you were at 10 seconds now. Be aware, you might find out it's like, it might take 20 seconds instead of 10, or it might take 25 seconds instead of 10 or 15. That's what reciprocity failure is. So be aware if you're like doing this calculation in your head, this is like, okay, I did a 3-stop filter, I was here, and I did a 3-stop filter, that means I should be at the shutter speed. And I do that shutter speed and it doesn't work out, that's okay. Take another one longer. Okay, that's all that this is about, right? So let's talk about some uses. Let's actually look at some pictures. And before we look at pictures, I have a little story to tell you. Once upon a time, land far, far away. I used to, when I did my classes, I used to put all of my greatest award-winning photography in these classes. I wanted to wow my students. I put both of my pictures in there that were good. All right. I actually had in one of my classes, somebody tell me, they said, it actually was a question, the way it was a statement, worded as a question. And this gentleman came up and he says, I hope this isn't going to be another one of those classes where the photographer just, this is his portfolio and you're just showing off all your fancy pictures. I was like, wow. But I took that to heart. And so today I shoot a bunch of crappy pictures for you. But that's not entirely true. But the thing is, today I try to just use kind of mundane pictures. These aren't going to be necessarily fancy pictures where they motivate you to go do this stuff. I'm trying to educate you about the techniques, not say, okay, go do this. And your pictures are probably going to be better than my pictures anyway. So why should I show you a bunch of fancy stuff? But let's talk about some of the uses of them. So one is just moving water, right? So here I have some moving water, a little mini waterfall. I've shot it. Now, by the way, I meant to shoot it at 100 ISO, 16, but it ended up being 125 at f30. Whatever, right? Because it's in raw sunlight. So I wanted it to be sunny 16, but somehow I bumped the sunny to 125 at f13, which by the way, is the same as sunny 16 because of reciprocity. I stopped the lens to 16, but I didn't want to slice. I slowed the shutter speed down to 100, so I have a third stop off on those two. I don't know how I got them, but that's irrelevant. Here, at 100th of a second, which is the lowest I can go, right? If my lens goes to 16, and my ISO is at 100, that's as low as I can go, sun 16. I don't have much movement in the water. And certainly if I had a faster shutter speed, which would be required if I opened the lens up and wasn't getting as much depth of field, if for some reason I wanted that, my shutter speed would have to be even higher. So by putting on a neutral density filter, I can get now to a 6-second exposure. All right. And I get blur in the water, which is what many of us want when we photograph this kind of stuff. Right? We want that blur, that silky look. Now, this is where, since we're having this conversation, one of the things we tend to do when we start doing this is we want to go as much as we can. So I'm shooting in raw sunlight, so this is about as far as I can push it. But most of the time, if you're doing a waterfall or something like that, you're going to be in an environment where it's a little more shaded. So you could probably push this a little farther. If you go too far with your exposure, what happens is that the highlights in the water will start to actually just get kind of glowy looking and weird because it cooks in too much. So be aware of that, you gotta find your happy medium. But we all start out going probably a little bit too far, because we want as much blur in the water as possible. I actually, I did this for, the purpose of showing you. I actually like blurred water, but a little bit less blur. Right, so you could do a little bit less ND and have a 3-second exposure or a 2-second exposure. You'll still get blur in the water, but not as much blur. You'll still see some of the movement. The amount you like is up to you. You gotta find, this is your art, it's not my art. I'm just trying to teach you how this works and the techniques. Clouds. We've all seen pictures done this way. So this is a 100. The lens of it was a wide lens, so it actually went to 22. So I closed it all the way down. The only filter on here right now is the Polarizer filter, and still at that exposure, I was at 0.3 seconds. But I want some movement in the clouds. I want that kind of streaky look. Right? And we've all seen this. By adding the 10-stop ND, I got it to 120 seconds, 2 minutes. Right? And in that 2 minutes, the clouds will move. Now, this is going to be relevant or relative, not relevant, different R word, to how much wind you have, right? How fast the clouds are moving. If you do too long an exposure with too many clouds, it just becomes a cloudy sky, right? It can just become just all white. The faster the clouds are moving, the less time you need. Also be aware of what direction they're moving. This can really play a huge role in the composition of your photograph. Depending on which way they're going, you might want to compose it in such a way that it looks relevant to the picture. I did another one here. I added some more ND, so I did a 10-stop and a 2-stop, which added just a little bit more, which allowed me to get to 150. Right? Now, 150 is kind of getting into gray area, in my opinion. Something to be aware of is that you can overheat your sensor. 2 to 3 minutes is the longest I want to have my camera exposing for at a time. There are photographers who'll do 8, 10 longer minutes, right? But if you do that a lot, you can actually overheat your sensor and line it up. Okay, so be aware. So this is kind of pushing the envelope for me as far as that. Now you might ask yourself, how does one do this? You have to put your camera into bulb mode. Today's cameras usually go up to a 30th of a second on your normal shutter speed range. And then you have bulb. Who knows what bulb is?
This holds the lens up.
It holds the lens open. It's a throwback to the old school cameras where the photographer had a bulb in their hand with an air tube. And they were the timing mechanism. When they squeezed the bulb, air went through the tube, pushed the shutter open, and as long as that photographer held the bulb, it stayed open. Keep in mind, in those days, we weren't shooting anything. Well, we weren't. I included myself in this. I'm not that old, right? But we collectively as photographers, we're not shooting anything at 125th of a second. It was all 5 seconds, 10 seconds, right? So the longer the photographer held the bulb, the longer the shutter stayed open. So now we're going to use a cable release on our camera. Most of the cable releases, I like still just the old-fashioned physical cable that goes to the camera. I don't need the fancy remote and all that stuff because I'm going to be right by the camera. I like simple. most of them have a little locking mechanism that you can push and lock, and it will stay open until until you release it. The camera will actually do the counting for you, or you can pull out your phone and just set the timer on the camera, on the phone, I mean. But to get to your 100 seconds or 120 seconds or whatever. Okay, any questions about that? Okay. By the way, this same technique will also create very glass-like water. Right? So this and a technique I'm about to show you kind of dovetail. Now, one of the things about, you shot the picture at the pagoda at the Muni, right? And there's a name for that island, and I always forget what it's called. But she shot and she posted on social media. I'm sure you all saw it. The water was very glassy. It was a very still day.
Yeah.
Now, in that case, her picture didn't record waves because there were no waves. But if it's a windy day and there's normal waves on the lake, on the river, on whatever, and you take a short exposure, it will record the waves. If you take a longer exposure, it only records what's the constant. So the waves don't show up. The water becomes very smooth, very, very even, because that's the constant of the water. Now be aware, because there are waves, it's a dull, flat, matte surface, right? You don't get the reflection off of it, but it does become a very solid surface on your lake. So you can make stuff disappear. Now, I was going to put into this a video that my friend shot while we're doing this, because we were over at Shaw Park, and I actually have in this picture people dancing around in front of the camera. I decided not to try to put the video into the slideshow, but I have it on my phone. I'll happily show anybody who wants to see it. There in this picture are people dancing around. There are cars going by. You don't see them. This is the technique I was talking about, because unless something stays there, this was a 2-minute exposure. Unless something stays there for the full 2 minutes, it doesn't hook into the sensor. Mm-hmm. So this is how architectural photographers in New York would take a picture of a building and have no people in it. Now, if you have some clown who comes up here and leans against the side of the building for 2 minutes, he's gonna be in the picture. But if you have just movement, it won't show up. I use this technique, I learned this technique decades ago, and I've used it. One of the things I shoot is events. I've been a wedding photographer most of my career. One of the shots that couples, banquet facilities, and they want is the room, once it's all decorated, right? With nobody in it. Well, you know how impossible that really is to get? Because once they have the room set up, they let people in. But they want this picture, right? So what I learned is if you get it right at the tail end, of course, these all need a tripod, and you guys are smart, you know that. Put the camera on the tripod, you crank the exposure way down, like this. It's toward the end, the servers who are still pouring water, walking around, they don't show up. The people who are walking through the room, if they don't stay in one place, they don't show up. It's kind of a neat technique. You can also use this if you go to do landscape photography or any of that kind of stuff in touristy places where you have lots of people. But you want the picture of the, Portland Head Lighthouse. Good luck finding that picture without people in it. But if you do this, you can get the picture without the people in it. So this takes me into, this is just a fun thing now for you. Since we know we can have people disappear. I don't know if this is gonna be any fun for any of you. But you can also make ghosts. I'm gonna show you ghosts in a minute. This is Interstate 64, it's 791. You see any cars?
No.
It's because it's a 90-second exposure. So the vehicles aren't there long enough to cook in. This is another example of using that long exposure.
Cause I've been on that I've been on that highway.
Yeah, I mean,
And then,
it's not that there was an accident on both sides blocking all the traffic, right? Yeah, so. But the ghost thing. Going back here,
Oh, look at that.
okay? I had her stand there for part of the exposure, and I cut it down to 13 seconds because. Her being, doing the 90-second exposure was just too long to, for this purpose. But she was 13, so in March. She's transparent. Because I had her leave partway through the exposure,
Pretty cool.
right? So next time you see a ghost picture, you'll be like, or next time you want to fake a ghost picture. Right, this can be a fun technique to play, right? Where because you're blocking some of the light, you get that longer shutter speed. And now you just have her stand there. She stood there for probably 8 or 9 seconds, and then she left. So now you see what was there where she's not there, but you also see her. So, and you can play with this technique. It can be a lot of fun.
can I take the Flint Mansion?
Yeah, right.
My sister's, she's got photos that makes you wonder.
Right, and now you're like,
Oh, you're like,
I know how you did that.
I'm not staying at Flint Mansion anymore at all, I'll tell you that, she isn't either. What's
So-
that?
So one of the things that I mentioned, like video, right? But maybe just you want to use large aperture, right? Maybe you want to just do pictures and you don't want. This is especially relevant for video. But maybe you don't want to shoot at 22 or 16 or 13 or down here. You want to shoot at 1.4. Well, here, I gotta be at 100 ISO, I'm at 1250. I can't shoot video at 1250. Well, I can, but it's gonna be choppy. Early on, and I'm happy to explain this whole like double the frame rate if you want to get into the weeds there, but. Early on, they figured out that the perfect frame rate for video is twice this, the perfect shutter speed is twice the frame rate. So. I can't do this in video, so if I put an ND filter on, Turo?
What's that?
Turo McKinney.
Huh?
Turo McKinney.
No.
Okay, he comes in the store. Here I put an ND filter on. And with the 6 stop, now I can be at a 50th of a second, which if I'm doing video, that works. Or maybe I just don't want to be at a 12/50th of a second because I'm doing filter flash or this or that. Right. So.
And if you put a polarizing filter on, you can get rid of the reflection when it's not
Correct.
less, if you want to.
Correct, so let's
I kind of like that.
talk about polarization. Right? Here's a picture with no polarization. I assume you guys know about polarizers.
Yeah.
But I wanted to include it here because a lot of times as landscape photography or whatever, we'll combine the two. And keep in mind that a polarizing filter is going to inherently cut some of the light down. So you have polarizer or no polarizer. One of the things that I like to point out to people, and I gotta tell you, when I discovered this, it was kind of an eye-opener for me. And it actually happened at Schiller's. It's a picture we use all the time. Dawn, one of my coworkers, I used to take people outside with the polarizer and I would show them on the windows of the building or whatever. And Dawn says, hey, you know, on your day off, will you go take some pictures with the polarizer so I can show people, so I don't have to take them outside, because she wasn't inclined to do that. So I said, sure, Dawn, I'll do that. And then I came back the next day, or Wednesday after my day off, and I'm walking up the stairs and I get to the front door, I was like, oh, I forgot to take the pictures for Dawn, Dawn's gonna have my butt. So I did what most of the photographers in this town have done. I turned the camera around and pointed it at the train wreck saloon. There's more pictures of the train wreck saloon across the shoulders than there are of the arms. I'm convinced of it. Okay. And I took a picture. And it darkened the sky. It did all the stuff with the sky. So if we look at here, right, darkened sky. But what I was surprised by was what it did to the ground and the stuff that isn't the sky.
A lot more lush.
It just maybe makes it look better. There's another example. The picture of the one in Clayton, you know, you get the windows there, and you got the windows here.
Wow.
Darkens the sky, it does all kinds of wonderful things. So the point is that you might be able to pull off what you're trying to do. If you're just trying to get a little bit more. A polarizer is good for about 1.5 to 2 stops of darkening. So if you're on the edge of like, I just want a little bit more blur in the water. You might, if you got a polarizer with you, you might just put the polarizer on. That's gonna get you to where you need to be, potentially. I don't think that there is any better tool a photographer can carry as far as this kind of stuff goes than a polarizer and a 3 or a somewhere 3 to 6 stop polarizer, or a neutral density filter. And the reason is that that just gets you into this space. Right, the polarizers do what polarizers do, they help. If I need to put some neutral density on, you know, those of us who get fancy and spend extra money, right? We have all of these great tools, but one filter, one 3-stop ND filter, and a polarizer, which combined gives you about 5 stops, 4.5, 5 stops, will get you through it. To be sure, having the variable ND is nice. The cool sheet filters are even nicer, but they're more costly. So where do you need to be? Any questions?
No, I'm fascinated.
What's the price difference between the variable and a, like a?
So that's an excellent question. So, and it's Schiller's. I don't know if you know this, I work for Schiller. At Schiller's, we've actually stopped carrying the fixed NDs. We only now sell the variables. And we sell them in a couple grades. I'm gonna segue into something. This kind of goes back into what I was talking about with, like, some photographers don't like variables because it's more layers of glass, right? This might sound like Schiller's salesman talk. And anybody who knows me.
But finish your
Give
thought.
me just a second, Holly, and I'll answer that. Okay, so. Anybody who knows me will tell you, I am not Mr. Salesman. I, quite frankly, really don't care if I sell you stuff. I'm there to educate you. I'm there to help you. In fact, when they interviewed me to get the job, Frank
Yeah.
asked me this really dumb question. Because he looked at my resume, looked at all the things I had done, ran commercial photo labs, I had done this and that. They said, why do you want to sell cameras for a living? I said, I really don't. It was the only thing I could think of, I didn't have for that. I said, I really don't, I wanna help people learn. And if they need a camera, I'll sell it to them. Oh, I have the answer you're looking for, but it's answer account. They accepted it and they still hired me. But the point is that this does sound salesman. Don't buy low grade filters. Don't say, oh, I want to save money here. Because you're shooting through this. Some of you, at least in the room, wear glasses. Right? You know what happens when these, right? You're shooting through your filters. So buy the good quality filters. Spend the extra money. You won't regret it. You might for a day, but later you won't. Having said that, a good level variable ND, which was the question, and it's going to be depending on what size they are. But you're probably spending 150 to 250 for a variable ND.
Yeah, I don't have a problem, what the price was on this. I want to say
Okay.
$100 or so.
So I have two. They're both 77s, one's the extreme, so one has even greater range. It gets darker. One is priced at $199, one is priced at $219. These are 77 millimeter, which are fairly large. And they're the top of the line that we sell. So 150 to 200 bucks is probably what you're gonna spend for a good quality variable. You can get, we're probably closer to $100, a fixed end. But as I mentioned, at Schiller's, we don't sell them anymore. A kit like this, right, that has this guy, you're spending $500 to $700. Right, so it's an investment. But if you're using it a lot, so most of those glass filters, you know, if you're buying like this filter alone, one filter is in that, you know, because it's good glass. You know, you're in the $125, $150 range for a filter. So, but,
Here's our question.
so the question is, how do you avoid vignetting? So when you screw in a filter, right? It's putting stuff in front of the lens. If you're screwing a variable ND or even a 10-step ND in front of an already, if you're using Holly,
At the time.
Holly, if you're using like a UV filter on your lens, and then you're putting that other filter on top of that, it's pushing it out too far. At 24, you're probably going to get vignette. Because at the widest angle, and so that's what she said without zooming, right? So at 24, you're catching the edges.
Gotcha.
So would you
Right.
suggest removing the UV filter, just taking the UV filter off altogether and?
Yeah, because you're pushing the now ND filter or polarizer out farther from the edge of the lens, right? So you have the front of the lens, which they've already factored in. It's like, okay, we don't catch the edge. But now I put a filter on it, a UV or a protective filter, which probably I'm not getting vignetting. But then now I put another filter in front of that, and keep in mind the variables are thicker because they have two pieces of glass. Now you're pushing out to the edge that we're at 24. I run into this all the time with my 14 to 35 lens. I can't stack filters on my 14-35 where I get the vignette. So some of that can be helped. Also, Holly, by going with a step-up ring. So I don't remember, I think the 24 240 is a 72 millimeter.
Yes.
Is that what you have?
Yeah.
So you could do like a 72 to 77 step up. So the 77 millimeter filter is wider, bigger. So you're not gonna catch it as much. But then now you're back to that whole thing where your hood and stuff isn't going to fit it because it's too dark. But, and sometimes with the modern lenses, they're just really pushing the envelope, so if we start putting stuff in front, we're gonna catch the edges. So if you can't get it at 24 without some vignette, you might have to get a little less white. It's a sensible. Or accept the vignette. But who wants the dark corners? And I assume everybody, so we can.
Yeah, Holly said.
Yeah, and that's one of the other advantages to these. Right, so when we have this in front of our lens, it's not going to vignette because it's large enough. Right, so. But you pay more money for that, so. Other questions, anything?
Are you overwhelmed or inspired?
Yes, inspired, like
Yeah.
I've got to believe see with filters, I typically just have a UV filter on my camera. You know, back when I had like a film camera, I had a polarizer and it had a yellow filter,
Right.
it had a, I don't know.
Thinking.
But I'm encouraged to go back to my roots and start using a polarizer filter again, at least use that.
Well, polarizer is great, and I know Diana uses hers like almost all the time.
Yeah,
It's on your camera.
He needs a UV as well.
Yeah.
Does
Does that polarizing filter affect all the math behind?
Thanks, Barbie. I'm sorry, what?
Does the polarizer filter affect also the math? Now, besides getting the vignetting, does it affect the math? That when you're trying to evaluate?
Well, you have to factor it in. Now, one of the beauties is, I'm sure that everybody's shooting digital, right?
Yeah.
Right, and nobody still capturing on film. I mean, we sell a lot of film and we process a lot of film. But with film, we had to do all of this math. Right? The beauty of digital is, many of us are on mirrorless. So we see it right through our lens. By the way, if you're involved on your camera, the live view isn't accurate.
Oh,
Because it doesn't know how long you're gonna leave the shutter open, so it can't simulate. But, we have digital cameras where we take a picture, we can look at. So worst case scenario, a minute and a half or 2 minutes later, you're going to know what
Right.
the picture looks like. But the polarizer is good for, depending on the polarizer, a stop and a half to 2 stops of light. It's going to block some light. If you hold the polarizer up,
Right.
it's
But I
it's
dark.
it's a darker, now it's not as dark as the ND filters. But they have, I don't know if you, want to try next time?
Yeah.
I would go do it, but I don't think my tether will let me do that.
Can you
far.
get it? No, you must just push one of those buttons. There you go.
But, this is a polarizer filter. Right? I mean, it's got some density to it. I'm tethered so that I can pass this around. So, since it's got some density to it, it's going to work like a neutral density filter on a certain level. It's just not nearly as dark.
And if you've never used it on your camera, you turn it as you're looking through the lens. You see the effect that has.
I meant to talk about that, and I'm glad you brought that up. So, for those who don't know how a polarizer filter works, once you put it, so that one mounts in my handy dandy little contraption here, and there's little wheels where I can turn this. Others that just go on your lens, they are made to turn. Your polarized sunglasses, you just put them on and they do their job, right? But as Yvonne mentioned, if you turn your head sideways, things change. We rarely turn our head sideways, and when they make the polarized sunglasses, they do in relationship to my ears and my nose where my eyes were going to be. So they just already have them pre-turned. But on the filter, we don't know where it's going to end up when we thread it on the lens. We don't know if the camera is going to be held horizontally or vertically, or at some other angle. So the polarizing filters turn to achieve the look you're looking for. Something that a lot of people don't really fully process is that you don't really have to turn the polarizer experimentally every time. Once you know where it polarizes, so there's going to be printing around the polarizer, right? You find the printing. Say, oh, when it's at 2 o'clock. I've achieved my goal of this is where it gets the greatest polarization. Now, when I turn my camera vertically, I can pretty much just turn that filter so that same printing is at 2 o'clock. It's going to be consistent. It just has to turn because we don't know where it's going to end up on the lens. If that makes sense.
Yeah, back in the old days when I had my Canon G3 rangefinder camera, so it was fixed lens, not through the lens viewing. And I loved polarizing even back then. So I would hold the polarizer up in front of me and go, okay, that's where I want it to be. And I actually scribed little marks on the filter ring. So that I know like one mark was where the influence of the one mark at 12 o'clock is put it on the camera, rotate it to that point, shoot the picture, and that was with film, and that always turned out great.
Yeah, so. And that was the thing, with film, you didn't have the screen on the back, right? That's why they have markings on them. You just have to figure out where the mark goes on and now with the digital, it's so easy that you just take a picture, or you can actually see it through the lens, right? You could do that on DSLR or on SLR cameras as well. So Nikon, stuff like that. But if you were using a twin lens camera or something like that, or a rangefinder style camera with a little viewfinder window, I had to just turn the polarizer until I knew where it was.
Yeah. So this is like really minutia, but I find it interesting. Most of you know I'm into stereo photography. Back in the day, they actually had projectors that you could put the stereo slides, the 35mm stereo slides into. 2 pictures on a slide, it was about this big. And you wore the polarizing glasses, like when you go to see a 3D movie. Okay. The polarizing glasses, there's straight polarization. One is polarized this way, the other one is polarized this way. The lens on the projector matched. So your left eye saw the left image, your right eye saw the right image, and your mind puts them together and gives you that 3D image.
Amazing.
I didn't realize that until I started doing, and I had a stereo projector at one point in time and had some glasses. And it's very interesting to see how that works. It's like, that's how they do that, because without the glasses, you're seeing 2 blurry pictures. Because they're just offset from each other.
Like this, it has little notches on the side.
So, any other questions at home? No? Well, that was easy.
So hopefully I've inspired you to at least pick up an inexpensive ND filter. Guys, start small. Right? Don't go spend $700 or $800 on this fancy set of stuff that you may not use. Only buy that once you say, okay, I'm going to use this enough that it's going to justify. So one of the things that I failed to mention, it has become very popular now in my world. You know, the ghosty picture, all right? A common picture now at weddings. Some photographers thought, oh, this will be cool. I think it's kind of corny, but right, is they will have the couple stand really still. And they'll drag their shutter. And if you're, so many of these weddings anymore, they're in barns and wineries and places, farms, right? So they're often bright outside. So you pretty much have to use an ND filter to get that shutter speed low. You don't have to do 120 seconds, but still, if you want to do more than a 250th of a second outside, you might need still some ND on your lens. You don't necessarily have to do the 10 stop, but they'll have the couples real still. And then they'll have wedding party members in the picture of move, spinning or In fact, at some of the venues, I think they do it often at one. It's called the ghost dance, where they'll have the couple stationary, but they'll have the couples around them. And, you know, they'll have the bride group stationary, but then they'll have the couples around them spin real fast. And if you drag your star a little bit, they'll be all blurry and ghosty. And the couple is, you know, they're solid,
Do you
right?
charge more for that?
What I wanted to do, and I never have had the right environment to do it, but one of the times that I shoot at lunch, but I haven't been there for a while. I wanted to add an extra couple Photoshop in an extra. And let them catch it. I said, wait a minute,
Who's that?
we only had 6 couples,
I
there's
don't
7
know, my
already.
wedding photos once or twice, and I don't think they were ever opened up after that, except
But-
the divorce.
But if you're outside, that's another time where, you know, to get that blur in the movement of the, you know, the people are walking past and, you know, the couple's stationary. So it does that.
Always is their favorite place is at the zoo to use the MD.
So, so I'm curious, Holly, other than the little waterfally thing at the front with the lake, how are you using a ND at the zoo?
Yeah, take yourself off of mute and talk. Holly.
Fine, I have to find the button.
Okay.
I actually like to use it in the bird cage because
Oh.
you've got those bright white birds with the dark backgrounds, and I really like using it there because otherwise you've got, you know, blown whites and, you know, the too dark background, but I like using it so I can kind of bring down the whites to where I can get some detail, but still have that black background.
Neat. And if you slow it down enough, you can get some neat blurry movement and flying birds and stuff like that. So,
Well, I haven't gotten that yet, but I have been known to spend a couple of hours at the birdcage, so it might happen.
right.
Here we
Well,
go.
cool. I'm glad to hear that you're playing with that NU filter. They could be a lot of fun. And so, you know, like I said, I suggest if you just want to start this and you're not sure how far in you want to go, you pick up either a single variable or a, you know, fixed 3-stop or 6-stop. 10-stop is a lot. 10-stop will give you the maximum amount of slowness, if that makes sense. But
Can you talk about how you would, dial in the sharpness of a photo with like a really dark ND filter because you can't see through it?
so that's an excellent question. What kind of camera are you on?
I have a Nikon
What flavor of Nikon?
Z8.
Okay, so with the Z8, it should give you, when you put the ND on,
Mhm.
it should still give you, assuming you have your menu set up right, accurate exposure compensation or exposure simulation. So what you see is what you get. On a DSLR, it wasn't what you see is what you get.
Right,
So on a DSLR,
okay,
if you put it in front of your lens on, say, a 10-stop or an
that's what
8-stop,
I was gonna say.
you wouldn't see anything.
Cause I used to use one on a DSLR, and I would have to manually focus. And then I would put the darker ND filter on, and then I would take the picture.
Right, and that is.
Because I couldn't see through the ND filter through my.
Right, because it was so dark, and that was one of the other things I did fail to mention about the slide-ins. You know, I can't see through this. I don't see you guys. Right, if I put it in front of the DSLR, look, I'm not gonna see you. But with the mirrorless cameras,
Okay.
so who's not shooting mirrorless cameras?
Not.
Is it not?
Yeah, so the rest of you guys are.
If you use your R7, that's mural.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
So on a mirrorless camera now, I will see is, obviously when I first put this in, it's gonna be dark.
Mhm.
I have to adjust my exposure, I slow my shutter speed down, it's going to give me true light view.
Okay,
It's gonna show me what it's looking at, I can just scroll my exposure down, in fact. If you wanna, play with that, you can, or where you have your,
and then you have to do that on the screen in the back instead of the eye,
it doesn't matter which
it
screen you
doesn't
use.
matter.
Yeah.
Okay.
But on a DSLR, you're right, it just goes dark because you're gonna have the exposure range. If your picture is gonna be too dark, you don't know that it's gonna be too dark or too light.
Right,
Which is another kind of advantage to a system like this. Of course, you pay for it, right? Because I have my bracket on, and then once I'm ready, I can just slide the filter in easily. So
I have a question
I have an answer, I'm good at this game.
on this neutral density filter.
Mhm.
What is this little screw for?
To turn it,
Oh, that's a handle.
Yeah.
Oh, I kept screwing it, not screwing it, trying to.
See, you
figure out
did
what
learn
was
something
for.
tonight too.
it's to frustrate you that when it falls out and you're like, where did that go?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what happens when you unscrew it. Yeah, it's just there, the little place to put your,
Okay.
turn it easy.
and I have one more question.
Um,
Does the quality of the ND filter degrade after time?
It shouldn't.
Okay,
Now, I'm not going to stand here and say that, 100 years from now, this filter is gonna be as good as it is right now.
So that-
But yeah, I'm not gonna be here in 100 years, so I don't care if it's still good. But in relative terms, I mean, some of my filters are decades old, but it's still fine. Now, they can get, just like anything else, wear and tear.
Scratched.
You can get scratches and, stuff like that. I have seen some polarizers. I've never noticed it on ND filters. I've seen some polarizers
that degrade.
that the coating, something, it starts to get weird. I'm assuming that's got to do with how the polarization filter stuff works. I haven't seen that on ND filters.
Okay.
I've definitely seen older polarizing filters, especially around the edges. In fact, I don't know if I have any with me, but I have some that around the edges, they're starting to get kind of weird.
Just to clean it like you do your lens?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
Yeah.
Doesn't need any special care.
No, they're just another lens.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought, but just double check.
This is my little filter bag, on the side, microfiber, there's another microfiber attached to it. That's what I use primarily, is microfibers. For filters, I'm not as big a fan, but for lenses, lens pens are really great. Anybody know what a lens pen is? They're actually great. I got turned on to them quite a long time ago. They were a new product, and I was shooting a wedding. I got to a salon. It was a little strip mall. I got there a little early, just make sure I was in the right place. And so I noticed that in this little strip mall, there was a Creedmoor camera. All right, I had never been in a Creedmoor camera. Right, I didn't work at Chiller at the time, but I had never been in a Creedmoor camera. But I had some time to kill, so I walked in there. It was one of their little satellite stores. I walk around, and guy's like, "Can I help you find anything?" Or I was like, "No, I got everything I need. I got my gear. I'm just waiting for the salon or whatever." And he's like, "I bet you don't have one of these." I must have been new at the time. That's why I'm guessing he thought I didn't have one. Well, he was right. I didn't. It's called a lens pen. And at one end, it's got a little brush. But at the other end, it's got in the cap. Do you have one?
Oh, one of those,
The lens pens?
like this.
Yeah. Yeah, these are really great. Our rental department uses these exclusively to clean lenses. All right. At this end is a little like felty brush. And inside the cap is some stuff that presumably fell to Earth from outer space or something. And when you put this in there and you rub it, that stuff gets on, it's like carbon-y stuff. And this will just like, it's like a magic eraser on your lens. It's really great. But they are slightly concave. So if you use them on filters, what happens is you wear them out in a hurry. Because the filter's flat. Now, they actually started making lens pens that instead of being concave are flat. For filters. Because what happens is the contact patch on the concave, it only hits the edges and it wears out the edges real quick. But these work great too, and they don't take up much space, and then at this end it's full frame.
And how expensive are those?
15, 25.
Oh.
Yeah. Okay, so, okay, Holly, as you're looking at, I still go like, our 7 months. You mean your 70 months, you?
Oh,
Yeah,
you should have be our 6 month too as well.
right, yes, so,
Yeah.
so the 70 was a great camera, I love the 70. So, yeah, you meant 70 months, you.
Yeah, so maybe 35, something like that. Cool, thank you, Paul.
Thank you for having me.
That was great. Who's handing these out?
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording now, bye.
Oh, okay. Bye, everybody.